Hi everyone, welcome back to my second game using the new rules, Muskets and Tomahawks. If you watched my first game, you realise I'm new to these rules, so I'm using this as an opportunity to learn to play the rules. The last one was done in 3 parts, and I've received a lot of tips and help and suggestions and corrections as to what I was doing if I was doing something wrong. So thanks everyone that did that. So I'm getting to know the rules quite well now, and I thought I'd have a second game using units that I hadn't used in the first one and just trying something different. So it's going to be another sort of experiment really to see how the rules go. Now in the first game I did one of the scenarios from the book, but in the second game I'm going to use one of the scenarios from the Redcoats and Tomahawks supplement. So firstly, let me show you the game, and then I'll explain the scenario and go through the troops I'm going to be using. The first supplement available for Muskets and Tomahawks is for the French and Indian Wars, the American Wars of Independence, and the War of 1812. And on page 36, there's a way that you can choose a scenario. So what I did was I rolled the dice to see who was going to be the attacker and who was going to be the defender. And it's the Americans won that. They used this table here. And then we looked at the missions. Okay, and it turned out that the Americans are the attacker on what they call the Savage Wilds. There's no buildings on this map. So the Americans had to be, being the attacker, had to be from this red section here, and the defender from the green section. And if you turn over the pages, the Americans' mission was the exploration section, and the British was just a battle. Okay, because if you look here, they had to roll a dice depending on what section they are. So the Americans rolled a 2 and got the exploration scenario, and the British rolled a 5 and got the battle. So the Americans have to deploy first, and they have 3 deployment points. So just without reading all through both of those, I'll just tell you what the situation is briefly. The Americans had to put their deployment points out first, and they put one over there on the northern edge, and they put 2 others on the eastern edge where they could put the bulk of their troops. All of their troops have to be within 6 inches of one of those deployment areas. And the British over here have 3 deployment points. They put them all on the western side of the board. Now the objective in this scenario is for the Americans to leave the table if they can on opposite points of where they put their deployment points. So you see that one in the north there, then there's another objective here. If they leave the table at that point, if they get half of their army off either that point or the others on the table, you see there's one there, there's another one here, because they are opposite the deployment points they put on. If they get half their troops off the table, they won the game. The British, which is battle, is literally just to kill as many of the Americans as they can. Basically, they've got no objectives other than to cause heavy casualties on the American force, who are trying to come off of these or reach these objective points to leave the table. Well, the Americans are going to find it difficult to leave on these 2, because that's where the main British force is. So I think the Americans obviously are going to be trying to come off this point here. I've found over the years, when you play any skirmish game, rather than just have a straight battle, it's best to use a scenario. It makes the whole game more interesting. And there's certainly a variety of scenarios that can be used in the Muskets and Tomahawks book. And this is just one that's come up randomly. Now you'll see I'll put most of the trees in the north. This was randomly put out by me earlier. I didn't know what the scenario was going to be at that point. I just put the trees to the north. I've got a rocky ground here, which will be interesting. Good cover for somebody. More rocky ground in the middle. I've got a hill over here with a bit more rocky ground on, and then to the right I've got a marsh. The table is slightly smaller than would normally be 4 by 4, but this is 4 by 3. Now I originally intended for this game to be 500 points a side. The last game that I did was 300 points. So I've increased this slightly. You can see there's the British sheet. You can see there's 5 regular units. I'm including officers in this. 5 regular units, a couple of German units, an officer and some Brunswick Dragoons and Butler's Rangers. Now, if you look at the sheet, I've colour coded it just for ease really. All the orange ones are regulars. Now that's where, there's the regular commander. So he's got a unit of British Grenadiers, a normal line infantry, some light infantry over here, and then some light dragoons. Then we've got an interesting thing here. We've got a Prussian officer with some Prussian infantry. In fact, they're not infantry, they are the Brunswick Dragoons, which in fact in the American War of Independence fought dismounted. They didn't actually take any horses to America or saddlery in the hope that they would find it there. But in fact they didn't. So they fought their one battle on the ground and they got rather hammered in that. But anyway, I've got some other Prussian troops, but I just thought interestingly it'd be nice to have those guys on the table. Now you'll see I've got an artillery piece as well. I'll come back to that in a minute. The American force, again, I've colour coded it. As you can see, we've got a provincial officer on the horse here, and he's got 2 continental infantry units, which are provincials, this one and this one here, and then he's got a unit of light dragoons, which are further away over here. Then there's another officer in the middle here, and with him he's got 2 units of American Minutemen, one of which is armed with a long rifle, which is the front unit. And then they've got 2 units of American riflemen, an American officer. So that's 3 officers on the American side and only 2 officers on the British side. The reason is because the other unit over here, which is a very good unit of Butler's Rangers they can't have an officer because they're not over 10. You could have at least 10 men from each unit type and have an officer. So I decided not to have an officer. The British Army comes to 500 points, the Americans 498. You'll also notice in there artillery. Now they're not on the list because I had intended not using artillery for 2 reasons. To be honest, I'm not particularly keen on having artillery in a skirmish. I think that most of the skirmishes that went on in the American War of Independence were just that. They were just skirmishes in the forests or around farmsteads. They did not include artillery. Artillery were used mainly for sieges and in the big battles. But they're in the rules, and I thought I would try them out. So I added a unit of artillery in addition to the 500 points for each side. As I say, I'm not particularly keen on using artillery. I think they can dominate. There's not a set of rules I've played yet where artillery have been, I think, worth having. They've either been overpowered or rubbish. Reading through these rules, they look pretty powerful to me, so I'm not sure how it's going to work out. But I'm going to use them just as an experiment to see how we get on. Now I've given out the cards, dished out the cards. The British have got their 3 cards to start with. They've also got 3 command chips here, 1 to start the game and 2 for each officer. And the Americans have got 4 chits because they've got an extra officer and they've got their cards as well. Now what I'm going to do with this game is, because it's going to last a long time, I'm going to probably spend the next 2 or 3 days playing it, a couple of hours each day, and I want to keep my video as short as possible. I will actually, in most cases, just do all the moves and tell you what's happened after each move, unless it's something that we haven't used before. Now I want to explain how I think artillery works, so when an artillery goes to fire, I will actually do that with you and show you how my interpretation of how artillery works. I may have got it wrong as well, so in fact it would be good if people watch the video, if they know better than me. If I do something wrong, please tell me, because I'm not convinced that when you read anything in a new rule book, sometimes you interpret it a way that's not meant to be. So do pull me up on it if I do something wrong. But I'll try artillery. I wasn't going to, and I wouldn't normally, but as they're in the rules, let's give them a try. So the Americans and the British have got 1 battery each. So that's it. I'm just going to do the first move. I'll do that now, and then I'll come back and let you know how we got on. Okay, so I've done the first moves. The American Continentals here and here. The first move they moved up. Because they're more than 24 inches away from any opposition, they could add 2 to their move, so they've moved 6 inches, including the commander. But these guys, because they're going through marsh, have only moved 4 inches. That was the first move. The first move of the British was to move their irregulars in the wood up, because in fact they couldn't see these chaps and the Americans in the other wood. They could have had a hidden marker. I didn't put it out, but they should have had a hidden marker, which meant that these guys, no way could they see them. But then it's the next move was the Americans' turn, and these irregulars have also now moved up, and they can now see each other. I'll come back to that in a minute. The other irregulars have moved up as well, 6 inches, which are the Minutemen. Okay, also the Continental Cavalry have also moved up. So most of the American force have moved except for the artillery, because that card hasn't come out yet. And so far the British have only moved 1 unit. Now, with regard to spotting in a wood, the reason they couldn't see each other is because in a wood you get -4 for being in dense terrain. So that's -4 for spotting. Also, the units that are trying to be spotted are both scouts or natives, so it's another -1, so that's -5. This unit did have the hidden marker, but we'll leave that for the minute. And you get 1 back for being a scout yourself. So it meant it goes down 4 columns if I show you this here now. So it was on here, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Now within 18 inches they can see each other. So both units can now spot each other. Now it's, interestingly enough, the British move, but the British, sadly for them, haven't got a red card. So they can either use one of the blue cards, which means the Americans will move next. They certainly don't want to play the irregular card, because they know what will happen is that these guys will open fire. And they don't want to use the forward boys. So they're going to use some of their command points so that they can move, so that they can do something. And they're going to shoot at those Americans and try and stop them advancing. Right, hi everyone, welcome back to my game. Now, did anyone spot the deliberate mistake? Okay, well, I've got to be honest here, I messed up. The cards that were over here, you noticed there were 2 green, and I mentioned there were 2 green clocks. Well, they were dealt out at the beginning of the game when I was dishing out the 3 cards for each side. But in fact, I made a mistake, because if they turn up out the deck at that point, they're reshuffled back into the pack. So I've done that now. I've put those 2 green cards back in the pack, and then I've dealt out the next 3 cards because we finished the first move. All 6 cards were used, and I'll explain what's happened in a minute in the game. But you can see now we are where we should be. So that was an error on my part, which I've managed to put right now. So we've got 1 red clock guards come out. So there has to be a random event happening in a minute, which I will do. But let me just first of all explain what's happened. So far the Americans have moved quite a bit. They've moved forward their continental units, which are here. These are both Pennsylvania units in actual fact. The blue ones I think are the 3rd with the red facings, and the other blue unit over there is the 4th, Pennsylvania's. Right, so the cavalry's moved up as well, while the British haven't done a lot of moving at all. There's 1 unit here that's managed to move, but that's all. But there's a bit of a firefight going on in the woods. As you can see, the Butler's Rangers here have come off slightly worse. They're outgunned by the American skirmishers, and they've lost 2 men over there, you can see. And the Americans come over here. I've only lost the 1. So the British at the moment are getting the worst of that fight in the woods. You'll notice that the Butler's Rangers have got 2 fire markers, so they're going to take them 2 turns to reload. And the Americans, well, they're in the same position, but they have loaded at least once for each of their 2 units in the woods. This unit here are coming up to help out, and they're in a close order formation, so they're just about to do volley fire into the woods, which will help the situation. And the other light infantry need to move up to support Butler's Rangers, otherwise we're going to be in trouble on that flank. And the rest of the British over here haven't moved at all, but hopefully that will change soon. So that's where we are. I just thought I'd update you with that very first move that I've done on most of the units, and explain that I messed up on the cards, but that's been put right now. So the game will continue. Right, let's roll for the random event. Do the first dice, which is 1. So it's going to be in this section here. And the second dice, 7. So it's this one here. I don't know whether you can see that. I'll read it out anyway. You wouldn't put a dog out in this weather. Soldiers, on the other hand, obviously you would. Right, beating rain lashes down from now until the end of the game. Oh dear. Right, so we've got to now look up what beating rain will do on page 61. Oh, this could be a bit of a game changer. Right, so here we are, beating rain. Effects on movement. Rough ground, except that offering solid cover counts as very rough ground. This is going to slow things up a bit. Effects on shooting. The penalty for shooting at long or extreme range is increased by -1, becoming -3 for long range and -5 for a very long range. And effects on spotting. As indicated on the spotting table, units suffer -1 column penalty to their spotting. Right, that's going to be interesting. That's going to slow things up for the whole of the game. So rough ground, which is the woods, is now all very rough ground. This was already, the marsh and the rocky ground was already very rough ground. So now all the woods are as well. So that's going to slow movement down to -2 in the woods. And in fact, for the light infantry, where normally they would go through at normal speed because they are skirmishers, they will now have to treat that as a -1. So it's not going to make that much difference for movement anywhere. But the penalty for long range shooting is going to be penalised. So and spotting will make it slightly harder to spot. So we've got rain for the rest of the game. Right, so that's just a random event. And that only comes out when the red clock card is the first card that comes out of the pack. If it's the second one that comes out, if a green card comes out first, you don't do a random event. The random events can be quite effective. So, and there we are, we're just unlucky enough to get torrential rain for the rest of the game. Now I'm going to do the next move, and I'll see how that goes and come back later and explain what's happening. You'll notice the artillery still hasn't moved. The British artillery is still limbered up over there, and so is the Continental artillery, because the artillery cards haven't yet come out. But you'll notice that they are now about to. One over there and one over there. So when they do come out and we do some, well, at the moment they've just got to unlimber, so not much is going to happen with that first card. But when they do fire, then obviously I'll cover that, because we haven't done firing artillery yet, and I'd like to go through that with you. But everything else at the moment is going along smoothly, other than the torrential rain. Right, see you later. Okay, so I've done the next move. A few things have happened. You can see the Continentals here have moved up a bit more, and the Continental Cavalry have gone into that little gap, and they're starting to threaten the British infantry here. And the British regulars have moved up as well, so it's all starting to happen. And then the artillery have both unlimbered now, the British, if you look over here, and the American artillery, so they're ready to fire. In the woods, the Butler's Rangers have managed to reload. This infantry unit fired volley fire into the wood and managed to kill one of the skirmishers there, and that unit of 6 did a bad morale throw, and they've had to flee out away from the infantry. So a couple of interesting developments. Firstly, you'll see that the Continentals that were in the marsh have moved out of that marsh now, and they've gone into extended order. The reason they've gone into extended order is, I think they're a bit worried about these formed infantry and also the artillery on the hill. So they're hoping that maybe in that formation they'll take less casualties. The other Continentals haven't moved at all. They're staying behind this rocky ground, which at the moment is giving them a fair bit of cover. In fact, I'm sure they can't even be seen behind that rocky ground. The Continental Cavalry have done a brave thing. They moved up. The problem they have now, though, is that they're facing a unit here that's turned to face them. Fortunately for them, the unit is unloaded, so it's going to take them 2 moves before they can fire volley fire. If they do fire volley fire into those cavalry, they're going to be in trouble, but I think hopefully they'll be able to charge soon anyway. The trouble is that they're on their own. Look, they're facing some light infantry there, which are in fact loaded. That fire marker should be with the Butler's Rangers. And there's also the British light cavalry here, so they might have overextended themselves really, but we'll see what happens. The other interesting thing is, it's the Americans' go, and they've only got 1 regular British card, so when they play that, it's the British that are going to move. And the British, when it's their turn, have only got a blue artillery flag, so that is going to mean that this artillery will open fire probably on those Brunswickers, which are a nice target. So those next 2 moves are going to be quite interesting. So the Americans did play the British regulars card, as they had to. If their commander over here had been nearer those cavalry within 6 inches, he could have done a command move, because they've got enough tokens to do so, but he wasn't. So the Americans had no option really but to play that British card. So that's meant that the 2 regulars here have moved up, the Prussians, or the Brunswickers, and the British Grenadiers. Now you'll notice the cavalry now have moved into a position where they are going to force that the Continental Cavalry, if they do charge, they'll have to charge them instead of the British infantry. And the light infantry here are just about to fire into the Continentals, and I thought I'd let you witness that. So they got 6 dice. Let's roll to see what happens. So they've got 2 hits there. The Continentals will try and save. They saved 1, so they've lost 1 man. Let's take that figure off. So they've lost 1 man, just taking him away. And they have to do a morale test, which I will do now, which is a 7. Yeah, the Continentals are fine, their morale is fine with that throw. So although they lost a casualty, they're not otherwise too worried. The British, interesting thing here, they can either play this card or they can do a command roll, and I think that this officer is going to give an order to those cavalry which are within 6 inches to charge the Continentals, rather than let the Americans fire their artillery. So we'll do that now. So the cavalry have gone in. There's 6 against 6. The British cavalry are hitting on 6s. They're slightly better than the Americans, are hitting on 7s. So let's do the British first. So we've got 6 dice. We need 6s to hit. Only 2. So 2 hits for the British. Let's see whether the Americans save. They save on, because they've got a sabre, they save on 4s and over. No, neither saves. They lose 2. So the Americans will lose 2 figures. Now they'll fight back. 6 dice, hitting on 7s. 2 again, and the British will defend on 4s, and they saved 1. So the British lose 1 figure. So the British have won the melee. Now we have to do a reaction test. So the defender must test first. Let's roll a dice, and they rolled 9. So they're on 9, they're going to reduce. They had 2 casualties, they go down to 7. So 7 on the recruit table is a recoil or shaken. So they have to fall back. They cannot be shaken, so they have to fall back 10 inches. So that cavalry unit has fallen back now. So it means the British do not have to take a reaction test because they are not facing an enemy. So the Continental Cavalry lost 2 more men. They've lost 3 total now. So they were a little bit rash going forward like they did, and the British cavalry have forced them back and are now in a strong position, although they have lost 1 man themselves. Oh, just one last thing. I've realised that this unit that's retreated has to roll 4 dice to see if they lose any more men, so I'll do that now. Yeah, now they only lose another man on a roll of 0. So unfortunately for the Americans there, they've rolled 2 noughts. So they lose 2 more figures out of that unit. So, oh dear, the Continentals are in a bit of trouble there now. Now it's the British turn, and they have to, as you see, they have to play the blue artillery card. They do get a command chip for doing that. But now the artillery, the American artillery, are going to fire. There is a gap in which to fire at the British moving up, so we'll do that now. So the American artillery are going to fire. Now, what's interesting about this is they fire straight down the barrel, and if you line up that barrel, you can then pick a point somewhere along its range. I've elected to pick the point 2 inches in front of the unit that it's firing at. and you'll see why in a minute. Now that line it hits this figure without any doubt, and in the rules it does say it's an inch wide. So if you centre on that figure, you could argue as to whether this figure is included as well. That one certainly is. And I think that's going to be a bit of a problem for a lot of people when they do these. They're going to be arguing to whether a figure is in or not. It's touching the base, but it's not touching the figure itself. So I'm going to have a house rule that you aim at the figure, one figure, and that if it hits that figure, it'll hit the figure behind as well, but that is all. It doesn't hit this figure here, it's too far wide. Otherwise it's going to become very messy. There's going to be arguments as to whether a figure is in or not. I think it would be a lot simpler just to say that you aim at someone in the front rank, and then the rank behind also takes the hit. So the first thing you have to do is to see whether the ball hits the target or not. The American artillery hits on 6+. Ranges aren't taken into account, so there's no minus for ranges, although you would take in, as far as I can tell, it doesn't say any different in the book, you would take into account if there were in light or dense cover. You'd also take into account whether the unit's in extended order or not. Well, none of that happens. It's let's just check the range. It's 27 inches, so they will be seen, although there's a -1 for rain, there's no other minuses as far as I can see. Let me just check that. No, it's a pretty clear target. Even by dropping, there we are, even by dropping down for the accounting for rain, it's still a 48-inch range rather than 96s. It doesn't cover, now interestingly enough, it does cover 6 inches of marsh. So it would drop another column. It would become, because of the light cover, it would drop to 36 inches. It dropped 2 paces to the left, you see, once because of the rain, and second time because of firing over the light cover. So it's 36 inches. So I need to make sure that that unit is within 36 inches, which it is easily. It's actually only 26 inches away. If it had been firing over rocky ground, if that was rocky ground, it would be a bit more of a, it would be -2 for every 3 inches. So that would have meant that in fact they couldn't see the target. But anyway, they can be seen. So we're firing at this point here. It hits on 6s, there's no deductions. So let's just see whether it hits first. It rolls a 5, which means it hasn't hit the target it was aiming for. Now 5 is an odd number, which means the shell is going to, the ball is going to drop short. So you have to see how many inches it drops short from the point of aim. So you roll another dice, and this time it rolled a 9. So it drops 9 inches short, which is here. Not a very good shot at all, is it? And so it's missed completely. Now, as it happens, if it had been here, and say I'd only rolled, say, a 2, let's just find a 2, there you go. If I'd rolled a 2, it would have gone back 2 inches. However, the interesting point, and I need to get this clarified, but as far as I can see, the ball then goes on 6 inches from the target. It would actually still hit those figures, having missed the target. I'm not sure I've got that right, but it looks to me as though even though you miss on your original dice throw, as long as the ball hits a point where it still might make contact, even if it's not hitting the point of aim, it can still do damage. Now, had it hit those two guys would have been casualties, and then you have to roll to see whether they would die or not, and they only save on noughts and ones, so they both would have died. I don't know whether I've got that right or not, and I think that needs to be confirmed, and anyone watching this might let me know. So originally they fired, they missed the target, and in fact they did end up down here, so in fact the 6 inches wouldn't have made any difference. They actually missed completely. But had they only dropped an inch or two short, or an inch forward, if it had been an even number it would have gone forward, they could still actually hit that target and cause the same set casualties as if you'd hit with the original dice roll. And that to me just doesn't really make sense. I would have thought if you're going to do that, there has to be some penalty. The fact that your original dice was a miss. So you can see why I'm not sure about artillery, whether it's working or not. However, luckily for us, it doesn't matter in this instance, because they not only missed the target, the ball dropped short about here. So nothing happened in that instance. They missed completely, and the American artillery now gets 3 fire counters. And then when it is their next turn, they can take a fire counter away for every 2 members of crew. This American gun's got 5 crew, so it would be able to take 2 away in the next turn, but it'll still take a further turn to remove the other one. So artillery doesn't fire that much, and if it does miss, it's not going to be firing that much in the game. It does miss, it's almost a waste of points, but if it does hit, it can, once it hits the target, because they only save on noughts and ones, they are really going to be in trouble. So I think I've done that right, and if anyone is watching that knows the answer, if you can let me know. Either I've done it completely right, or I've messed up and misread the rules somehow. So that was the artillery for the Americans, which missed. Okay, so the 2 clock cards, the other 2 clock cards came up, so I've had to reshuffle the pack. The Americans have got 3 new cards, and the British have as well. So that's the end of the first part of this game. So just to recap, the Americans have moved forward, but their Continental Cavalry took a beating in the middle. Their skirmishers in the wood have fallen back here, and their artillery failed dismally to do any damage on the British that are moving forward in this direction. You've got to remember the Americans are trying to get off at this point here, and at the moment they don't look like they're going to do that, because these 2 British units, or the British Grenadiers, which is a very strong unit anyway, and the Prussian dismounted dragoons are in a very strong position. They've got artillery support that's ready to fire, but it hasn't done yet. So the British, despite losing a couple of figures early on from Butler's Rangers in the wood, they've actually recovered quite well and have now pushing the Americans, or putting the Americans under pressure. Right, so that's it for the first for today. I'll edit this and we'll do another small moves tomorrow.